out this episode of the So I've Been Told podcast. My name is Adam Kramer. I am the host. And yeah, there's been a little bit of a gap between episodes. I have been very busy working. The freelance lifestyle is sometimes very conducive to getting these things done, and other times it is less than ideal. But whatever, I'm back. My guest on this episode is Ted Hazzard, and he has a short film that is premiering today. Life is Pain is the name of it. I will put a link to it in the show notes. Any of the music you hear in this episode is by Ted Hazzard. And yeah, thank you for checking this out. I really hope you enjoy it. Ted is one of the best dudes I know. So yeah, I hope you enjoy hearing what he has to say.
Take me out when the roads are so bad. One day I'll rust over and my life will run dry. Till then I promise you that I'll be by your side.
Alright, man. So, how's it going?
It's going good.
Alright, well, let's go back to the beginning. So, how did you first get introduced to punk rock? And so we'll talk about your comics in a bit too, but we'll talk about music for a while to start things off.
Yeah, that's usually how these things go.
Yeah.
Usually when I do them with Jay, it starts off with these same questions, but by the end of the interview, Jay is really drunk.
Yeah,
and just lying upside down on Zach's couch asking nonsense questions.
Yeah, I generally stay sober for my interviews.
Well, I mean, I think that's the flair for Loaded Words podcast.
Yeah, that's
Jay. That's what Jay is.
That's kind of their shtick,
and that's why that's a good show. So,
yeah, I wish they put out more podcasts.
Jay's busy.
But I know, and
Living.
I've been slacking lately too. But
Yeah.
anyway, so yeah, let's get back on track. And like, how did you first get into music, and specifically, punk rock music?
Well, if we say music, I have to go all the way back to like when I was like 8 or 9.
Mhm.
Because when I was young, my mother was like, "You need to do something that isn't sitting in your room all day and playing wrestling video games." So she kind of was like, there's a music school in town, and we have a grand piano downstairs, so you could take piano lessons. And I was like, I don't want to. And then she was like, well, you're gonna whether you like it or not. So that I took piano lessons for a good chunk of my childhood, and then I started guitar, but then I kind of was like, I don't want to do this. It's too much. And then I got involved in sports in school for a while, but see, this leads up to that.
Yeah.
And then one day, I'm exactly see getting involved in punk rock and the whole cartoon thing is kind of together in how it happened.
Cool.
Because when I was in about 10th grade or so, I started getting really into animation and stuff and watching it and enjoying cartoons, and I always like to draw and stuff.
Mhm.
And then when I was sitting in a class one day, and I literally just drew through my entire 10th and 11th grade year because I didn't pay attention in school, but somehow I passed. So I'm sitting there next to this friend who I keep drawing funny pictures for. And she's like, "Yo, this is really good. You should do comics sometime." And I'm thinking, like, why did I never think about that before? So I started doing this crappy little sort of zine comic, and all at the same time I sort of stopped showing any interest in sports. And like, I think when I started bringing my sketchbook to wrestling practice, that's kind of when it was like, I'm more interested in the one thing than the other thing.
Mhm.
Okay, now this is where we get involved with the punk rock stuff. I sat next to the drummer of a band called Putnam Street for most of my 9th, 10th, and 11th grade year
Okay.
in homeroom. And I'd come in, and the first thing I do when I sit down in class, I take my sketchbook out and start drawing. He always thought, these are pretty funny. But he was kind of like one of those dick guys that talks to you like, "Oh, well, I'm better than you, but this is still pretty funny."
Mhm.
So one day, he sees me sitting there with my jean shorts, or I don't even remember what I was wearing at the time. I think I was in my whole Johnny the Homicidal Maniac days. I had a trench coat and, dark red hair, and I'm sitting there drawing, and he's like, well, at some point in the last winter, I was like, maybe I should Xerox these and sell them, and I started doing that. And he says, it would be a good idea if you took those and you sold them at one of the shows we do. And I kept hearing about these shows, and I'm like, what the hell is he talking about, a show? Are they gonna do West Side Story or something? And I was like, you know what, I'll go. And they're like, okay, well, watch out for the steps, because it was at the Strand in McAdoo.
Okay.
So I go that Saturday, I bring my big bag of comics, and they're like, we'll give you a table, you can sell comics there. And I show up, and I went in, and the rest is history. I went to every single show that I heard about for the next couple years that was on a weekend in McAdoo, Pennsylvania.
And around what year was that when you started going to those shows?
2003.
Okay. So you were pretty late compared to a lot of people as far as, getting into punk.
Well, I was involved with these people from, about 2001, but I didn't start actually going to shows until 2003, and then
Okay.
I was like, where have you been all my life?
Yeah. What were some of the bands that were playing at the Strand back in those years?
Well, the big one at the time was No Service Project,
Mhm.
and they're still kind of trucking around doing their thing. No Cash, which was a childhood favorite of mine, they always played the Strand. And No Cash eventually turned into Mad Conductor. Friendly Fire used to play up in McAdoo a lot.
Is
that
Mad Conductor there from Northeast PA?
No, actually, the whole group originally was from Nazareth, Pennsylvania, and that's
Okay.
about, I want to say about 45 minutes from the area here.
Yeah, and they're still a band, right?
No Cash for the Mad Conductor.
Mad Conductor.
I'm pretty sure that they still tour.
Yeah, because I think they've played here in Rochester. Like, I don't think I saw them, but I've heard about them playing here.
Yeah,
So
they're
that's
apparently
cool.
like really big in Buffalo.
Okay, that's
Yeah.
awesome. I didn't know they had any connection to that Northeast PA scene.
Yeah, well, it was funny because when I went up to play Buffalo a couple years ago, I wore my No Cash shirt,
Okay.
and Brandon Neal was like, "Oh man, No Cash, we love Bad Conductor and No Service Project and all those guys up here," and I'm like, "Wow, it is really a small world, isn't it?"
Yeah. Awesome. So, when did you first start, getting involved in playing, not just, more than just going to shows?
Well, one of the bands that played while I was involved in this, a month or two had passed, and I'm watching these bands, and I'm like, I'm thinking to myself, I'm like, I used to know how to play stuff. I could probably pick something up again and get good at it. And I kind of got a flair for, theatrics and stuff like that, because from a young age, I always, I really never had stage fright, and that was because of taking the piano lessons and doing the recitals and stuff
Okay.
when I was younger. So I'm thinking to myself, I'm like, I could probably sing in a band, maybe. And one of the bands that played was called Infernal Noise, and they had a guitar player by the name of Riggs Miller. And see, he was kind of on the outs with this band. He was like, "Oh, I'm the front man. I sing, I write music," but really the band was not very good at all.
Mm.
And the rest of the members were like, "We want to get a singer and get rid of this guy." Nobody wanted to tell Rig. So, that I guess we pulled, and she was like, heard I wanted to start a band, and she's like, "Hey, you could ask Riggs to be in your band because he plays the guitar and you don't." So I was like, I think there's more people in a band we're going to need than that, so I'll ask around. So a week or two passed, or maybe a month or something.
Mm-hmm.
I knew it was right before summer break, and I'm like, "Okay, so Riggs, we're going to do this band, right? Every week." He's like, "Yeah, in the hall." And I'm like, "It's going to happen, right?" "Yeah, it's going to happen. You just got to find the rest of the members of the band." So I'm like, "Okay." So I asked my one friend, Lance, who actually was dating that girl we both had a crush on, I guess. And we asked this other guy who played drums for a metal band, or wanted to play drums for a metal band, but in the end it was like, "Yeah, I'm not coming." And then while I'm asking around for, "Hey, we should I want to start a band, look for members," this random guy shows up, and his name's Dane. He's like, "I could sing." I'm like, "Okay, that's good, but I'm already the singer." "Oh, we have two singers." And I'm like, "Okay, well, what kind of music do you listen to?" I'm like into NoFX and Rancid and Pennywise and local stuff. "Oh, I'm into Blood for Blood and Insane Clown Posse," and I'm 16-year-old me. He's like, "This could work." So we had our first practice after we walked across town from West Hazleton to regular Hazleton in my room, and Riggs brought his guitar amp and his guitar, and we had one mic set up, and I sang my lyrics that I showed to Ryan, and Dane just sang whatever, and we were like, "Oh, this is going to work." And Lance showed up for one practice, and that was it. And after a week or two, or a couple of weeks, it was just me and Riggs again, and we're like, "Oh, okay. I guess those other guys aren't coming," and the Riggs is just like, "Good." So we started we got a couple songs together. We memorized them. We were actually getting not that bad. And then our friend J-Rod, who eventually would become the drummer of Terrortown High,
Okay.
through garage shows in a little place outside of Hazleton called Cunningham. And me and Rich were like, yo, let's both go. Maybe he'll let us play. Let's bring our stuff. So we asked him, could we play? And he's like, we have like a drummer, guitarist, or like just me and the guitarist. Like, all right, well, your funeral, have fun. But at the same time, we saw this young kid there who was about 14 at the time in a Green Day Kerplunk shirt. And he's like, yo, I play punk rock drums. And we're like, oh, you know how to punk rock drum? He's like, yeah, if you guys want someone to like sit in on drums for you, I'll do it. We're like, all right, well, this is going to be a giant disaster anyway, so get on up there. So he played with us. Everybody walked away, but we thought we were the greatest thing ever, and we told Justin right at that moment, you are in our band now, and we are called Choking Hazard.
And that was Justin.
Justin Phillips, he's
Okay,
in
so
one
not
win,
somebody I
or
know.
was in One Win Choice. I don't know what he's doing now.
Okay, so not anybody I know.
Nah, he's from this area. It was, like I said, he was in One Win Choice. He used to be in Arsenal Mayhem.
Okay, I remember Arsenal Mayhem.
Yeah, that was him.
Okay. Now, how long was Choking Hazard a band? And is that where you first took on the moniker of Ted Hazard?
Well, yeah, because the same J-Rod that we were talking about that owned the garage, he started calling me Ted Hazard.
Mhm.
So it just kind of stuck. And then, like, later on when I was in other bands, I'm like, if I just call myself Ted Miller, people aren't going to remember who I am. So I just kept using it to save face.
For a little while when I first met you, I thought that Hazard legitimately was your last name.
A lot of people still think that.
Yeah. I mean,
And then when they find out it's not, they bust my balls about it.
I've heard, like, crazier real last names, so it's not that unbelievable.
Yeah.
So how long did you guys have that band?
It was about a year.
Okay.
And then we got a bass player that was just a kid we knew down the street named Rob. He played with us. He actually got really good. He went on to be in Arsenal Mayhem, but like I started picking up the bass and the guitar at the same time, and I taught myself, you know, how to write music, how to play music at this time. And I kind of suggested to the guys, I'm like, yo, it would be cool if, like, I played second guitar. And they're like, no, not really, because you're just going to be the singer. And I'm like, but if I sing and play guitar, we won't have to find a second guitar player. They're like, no. And I was kind of getting fed up, but at the same time, the same kid who invited me to my first show was like, I'm fed up with my band. And I'm like, I am too. And he's like, well, maybe we should do something about that. Maybe we should start our own band. So eventually, I quit Choking Hazard, and that's what I did. I grabbed my bass, and I started jamming with him on weekends.
Okay.
And we got Tony from Things Left Unsaid to be our guitar player, and that's where Terrortown High came from.
Okay.
And eventually, Rich just joined that band, too, because why not? and, you know, it just keeps going and going. I, you know, start bands, I leave bands, and now I'm where I am today.
Yeah.
There's just so much more history.
Those first two bands, Terrortown High and Choking Hazard, did you guys release any music, as like, you know, demos, EPs?
Well, the entire album that we recorded as Choking Hazard is on YouTube.
Okay, cool.
And the same thing goes for the second album Terrortown High did, Controversy Can Be Funny. That was actually, we were signed to the infamous Acme Records to release that album.
Okay.
And after we released it, we decided to break up because our drummer quit, and we didn't want to get another one. And I kind of was just fed up at this point. I was like, you guys treat me like crap. I don't want to be in a band with you anymore.
Gotcha. What?
And plus, we wanted out of our contract. The guy was like, you have to have 3 albums for me under the Terrortown High name. And we were like, well, if we just not be a band, we don't have to do that. So we stopped being a band.
What year was Terrortown, like around what years was Terrortown High doing stuff?
About 2005, maybe, end of 2004 into like 2006 was our initial run,
Mhm.
and then after Pulp Fiction was a thing, halfway through, I'm kind of like talking with Tony and Riggs again, and they're like, "Yeah, we want to do TTH again," and I was like, "No, ain't doing it unless Jared comes back." And then Jared came back, so I was like, "Okay, well, I got to quit this other band." So I show up at our drummer's house, and I'm like, "Hey, I gotta grab my PA because I'm running a show." Okay, man. Well, I'll see you at band practice. I'm like, "Yeah, I sure you will." I just drove off.
So, and
And-
Pope Fiction was another band that was in there as well.
Yeah, hold on a second.
Okay.
Yeah, Pulp Fiction was another band that kind of started off of TTH, because
Mhm.
literally when TTH broke up, this Bill kid, he shows up and he's like, "You need a drummer?" I'm like, "I think so." Like, "I could do it." And I was like, "Okay, let's try him out." And they're like, "You don't want to try him out." I'm like, "Oh, well, you know, I'm going to start a band with him." When I showed up to his house, he was like, "Where's the rest of the band?" I'm like, "You're looking at it." And then I just ended up asking our friend Bobby, who was in Ted and the Hazards, to play too. So that was a whole other band. We thought we were leftover crack, but we weren't. And you know, and that was the band I met Tyler Troutman in, I think. Yeah, pretty
Okay.
sure.
Cool.
We met in a basement in Jim Thorpe, and Leitzel was there too, and it was real awkward because they're like, we were supposed to play Backstage Enterprises or whatever the place was called. And we were like, we were also supposed to play some show, I think, but now we're playing this basement, and that was pretty much the extent of the conversation.
Yeah, back in the day, like there wasn't. It seems like there wasn't a lot of crossover between like the Schuylkill and Northumberland County like scene that Tyler and I were a part of together, and that like northeastern PA scene. And
Yeah.
somewhere around that time is kind of when things started to cross pollinate.
Well, what ended up happening, at least in my opinion, was when we were younger and we were doing music in our own towns, there was more people actually involved in it that wanted to do it. So, like, you had, about 10 bands in high school at the time that could all get booked on shows. And you didn't really have to worry about getting a band from out of state or out of town to come in and fill your spots up,
Yeah.
network and stuff like that. And then when everybody graduates high school and goes off to college, and of course there's going to be those people who get sick of the music scene and are like, I'm going to go be I don't know,
Anything
A
but a
lawyer.
musician. Yeah.
yeah, I'm going to go be a lawyer or something like that. And then you don't hear from them again until you see them at a bar about 10 years later, and they tell you how they messed their life up and they wish they could still go to shows and stuff, and you're just like, yeah, I didn't stop going. So.
Yeah. Now, did all these bands like play at like Cafe Metro? I just love talking about the Metro because I love that place so much.
Yeah, well, Choking Hazard didn't get on a Metro show. We tried tooth and nail to get onto a Metro show, and every time we tried, they're like, you don't have a demo, you can't play.
Mhm.
And when we finally recorded, we never released the album,
Gotcha.
so we didn't get on. But thankfully, Terrortown High, we had access, and since I was going to college at the time, I had access to a recording studio. So I was able to record our first album, which was terrible. But then we recorded with Joe Loftus, I think it was 2005, 2006, and we got Controversy Can Be Funny done, and we spent about 4 months on that album, polishing it up, making it good, and it came out in March. And when we started sending those demos to Cafe Metro, they told us right away, they're like, yeah, you guys can play this show. And we played about 2 Cafe Metro shows.
Cool. That was a special venue. It's not their first time coming up on this podcast.
Yeah, the second time we played, the crowd was nuts. And right after, we're like, yeah, let's go to Denny's. And the next morning I woke up and I heard a guy got stabbed at that show. And I was like, oh, this TTH is a little too much for him.
Yeah, I never was there for any of that crazy stuff, but I know that some shady things went down at that venue, but I still love that place. And you make an appearance in that documentary, too.
Well, yeah, see, the funny thing about all that was the other bands I was in, Rage for Cousin Jamie, Pulp Fiction, they never got a chance to play Gape Metro because that's when the music scene was mostly metalcore and screamo stuff, and we really didn't get to get out that much to do anything because that's all it was. I think, honestly, most of Rage for Cousin Jamie's shows were either we would play wrestling shows or we would play hardcore shows where we stuck out like a sore thumb at the Phillips Emporium.
Yeah,
And
that was such a weird time because I was playing, like 06, 07. I was in like sort of an emo band, and we played with a lot of metalcore, and it was real weird.
and the funniest thing about Rage for Cousin Jamie is that is actually the band where I got the No Beer and Pretzels in.
Okay.
Because our bass player was Eric, who was drummed for them for years.
Yeah.
And then when we decided to record, Cash and Wortman just show up, and they're like, "We're gonna be here too and help with the album." And Chelsea Smar was there too. She just kind of sat in a corner and didn't do anything. She just laughed the whole time. I mean, if you listen to the recordings, you could probably hear her laughing, but you could definitely hear John and Cash and me and Eric and all the other people laughing. It was definitely a weird point in time for the music scene, for me at least.
Mm-hmm.
And since we're bringing them up, we're like taking little bits and pieces of each band. With Rage for Cousin Jamie, that came from us trying to do Terrortown High again, and then Riggs being in 5 bands at once, and Jared just kind of being like, "Yeah, I don't think we should do TTH anymore." And I'm like, "Oh, so you don't want to do music?" He's like, "Yeah, but I want to do music with you because you seem committed." So let's do that. And then we're like, you know what? We're gonna be like. You know what we're going to do? We're going to be like Death from Above 1979, and I'm just going to play a distorted bass. So I started doing that, and we played our first show, and this is the funniest thing. Riggs showed up because his band was playing, and he took his guitar out, and he was playing it unplugged, and I'm like, "You get the hell off this stage." And then at that point, Jared shows up to practice. He's like, "Do you have a guitar?" And I'm like, "Yeah, I kind of have one." He's like, "All right, you're playing guitar now." But I don't want to play guitar. Can we get a guitar player? No, they're a guitar player now. So I started playing guitar, and then he's like, "Eric's going to be our bass player." This was his band. I was just the songwriter. And then one day, horn players show up, and I'm like, "Why are there horn players here?" He's like, "Oh, we have horn players now." So we had 3 horn players, and we were like an indie ska band. And then the 2 horn players kind of stopped showing up for practice, and Jamie Harashak, who's in Amber of 2 now, he was the horn player. And that was the band. And we played a bunch of on and off shows until we recorded our album, and Jamie was like, "I'm going to college," which is far away. And Jared was like, "I'm having a baby." And then I was like, "Hey, Eric, we can do something." And Dale, who was our second guitar player, and they were just kind of like, "If there's no drummer, we don't really want to play." So then it was just me with an acoustic guitar, and I'm like, I could just write my own music. And that's kind of where Ted Hazard came from.
Yeah. And did you, with any of these bands, did you guys play out of that kind of northeastern central Pennsylvania area? Or was Ted Hazard really your first?
Every band I was in before Ted Hazard and the F&O Buddies, and Condition Oakland, of course, we only played in Pennsylvania, and the furthest out we ever went in Terrortown High was in Du Bois.
Okay.
And that night was hell, because we drove all the way out there to play that roller rink, and we didn't get home till 4 in the morning. There was a snowstorm.
Was there anyone at the roller rink is my question, because I played there too, and it was an experience.
A couple people were there, I didn't see any Business Fairy stickers though, so I think this was way before Keith's time. But when I was out there, there were a couple people. There were people skating, and I think we played with a bunch of metalcore bands. And then we went to Perkins afterwards. And I'm like, the show sucked. I'm like, I don't want to be a musician. And they're like, you say that every single time. And then I'm like, I'm not driving home. I'm too stressed out. I'm gonna take a nap in the back of the car. And J-Rob was like, okay. So I got home 4 in the morning and just kind of slept. And woke up the next day, and I was like, all right, I want to see what the band's doing today. Maybe they want to practice.
Yeah, I played there, and I think it was '07, and with Red Eyes for Blue Skies, and Stephen Haramis, the guy who was the drummer in Endangered Youth, and a whole bunch of other bands. He used to do solo piano music. And we played a show together for like 5 people, 3 of which were our friends from Sunbury who drove out to see us. But we walked into the place, and the owner was just like smoking a joint, like right out in the open. He was like, "I don't know if anybody's coming, but you can roller skate for free." But that's rad that you guys played. Rad and weird that you guys played there too.
Yeah.
So
and we also. Since we're bringing that up, while I was in Rage for Cousin Jamie, we actually played the Capitol a bunch of times.
Okay.
And then we played it when it turned into Tuesday Tunes, which is funny because Terrortown High played Tuesday Tunes when it was in Lewisburg still.
Okay.
And that's, yeah.
Yeah, I don't think I saw you guys there, but I was at, like, Red Eyes played a lot of shows. That was like our home venue, was that Lewisburg Tuesday Tunes. There's going to be, I've got some episodes in the works where I'm hoping to talk to the guy who's making that documentary about the Capitol. So that'll be he and I have talked. We just got to set up a time to do an interview. I'm excited to kind of dig into the history of that place a little bit more. Now, when did you... So, was coming up to Rochester your, first, far away shows?
Well, the first time I played out of state, actually... Well, I kind of stopped doing music for a little bit and focused mainly on being a freelance comic artist.
Okay. And we are gonna... I know you're probably, ready to talk about stuff, which we'll get to it. I just gotta, you've heard enough of the other episodes to know I just kind of digging into all of this old shit.
Yeah, but that's just, I went out to Jersey a couple times to do some Comic-Cons, and in New York City, and then the first time I actually played out of state was with the F and Nobodies, and we played at the Clifton Bar, or the Flash Bar in Clifton, which was it was kind of a weird experience, because it's I met a band from out of state, and I'm like, okay, this is different. Mm-hmm. And it was fun to do that. And then when I that band broke up and I started doing Ted Hazard, I was like, you know what? Now that I'm not hung up by anyone else to play music with anybody, I'm just going to just play everywhere. So I played Jersey, and then I really didn't start trying to get out and playing other states until me and Condition Oakland started bumming around together. But the first tour I went down to Maryland, and oh man, I don't think I really went anywhere besides Maryland and a bunch of places in PA, so that wasn't technically a good tour, but it was still fun. And that was funny, that tour, because a lot of the shows I was on with Condition Oakland, and I'm pretty sure at the last show of tour, I was just kind of so we got a couple hours to kill. You guys kind of want to hang out before we play? And they were kind of all right, I guess. So we went to a weird subway in the Pocono Mountains and kind of just hung out. And then after that, it was yeah, we'll see you around. And then a couple months later, me and Tyler like sort of started jamming with Jay, this kind of side project band, and then we just started. It's kind of just started like we were like trying to find excuses to hang out with each other. It's just like, hey, we're gonna jam this industrial noise band if you want to come up, and I'm like, I don't want to be part of it, but I'll come watch. And then that was kind of just like the rest is like history with like hanging out with those guys and starting to get involved with them, and then it was like a weird part of time where I was involved in the Hazleton party folk punk scene, and I was like, I wanted more. Like, I wanted to be like, I want to do more with music. I want to get out. I want to tour. I want to actually be a legitimate musician. And those guys just all wanted to get drunk in a garage together. So they would do a lot. There was a lot of house shows in Hazleton at this point in time. And I was responsible for throwing a few of them because I would do shows at the old place I lived.
And that was the Hazard
the Hazard area.
Okay, yeah.
And when East Meets West would do shows at their venue, at their house, they called the Pit. And the last show we played at the Pit, which was the last show, Brandon pretty much said, we don't want any nonsense going on here, but we're going to shove 50 bands on the one bill.
Wow.
And there's going to be no stress or anything, and we're just going to have a fun show. And halfway through the show, it is a funny thing, because I asked Brandon, I'm like, could Tyler play? Because he's going to be coming back from Bethlehem. He wants to know if he could do a solo set. And Brandon's like, yeah, I just told him to show up with his acoustic guitar. And I'm there, and Tyler shows up with Dan, Billy, and Allison, and I think Jay was there too. But what ended up happening was in the parking lot, and the story is very fuzzy. There was this girl, and she got in a fight with her friend, and she started kicking cars in the parking lot of Damon's, which is next door. And Damon's calls the cops. They're like, something's going on over there, and there's a girl kicking cars. And next thing you know, someone runs out of the bushes, and it's like, oh my god, the cops are coming! The cops are coming! They're gonna shut it down! And there's a bunch of, like, underage drinkers and stuff like that, and so we're all, like, freaking out. And I, like, run out, and I don't remember who said what, but one of us was like, I'm like, Tyler, or Tyler's like, Ted. I'm like, what? And he's like, the cops are coming, we gotta get the hell out of here. And Tyler's just like, alright, meet me at, of all places, Taco Bell. So we go to Taco Bell.
That would be where I would expect Tyler to want to meet anyone.
And we're all there, and we're kind of just like, well, that was the whole thing. And then that, we just started, like, hanging out and stuff, and I kind of slowly stopped hanging out with those other guys. I'm like, I'm not going back there.
Yeah.
I want to be involved in a different part of the music scene. And then at that point, it was like, it started the little remains of music scenes that were in each area, like, Schuylkill County, what was left of Hazleton, bits and pieces of Scranton, like, a little bit of Williamsport. We all sort of just started doing shows together, and that the music scene went from being, huge in little areas to just kind of being broken up and then just kind of combining again, where it's like any show you'd have would have a band from, like, Williamsport, Scranton, Hazleton, and, like, Brackville. And it was kind of more interesting because you had so many more stories to hear and so many different personalities and new friends and stuff like that.
Yeah, no, there's definitely, I still see this now when I, come back home and go to shows. There's not always a lot of people, but there's like a close-knit community in the scene in Northeast and Central PA, for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah. So when you guys, I'm going to tie this in with the comics in a minute. So you guys, you did a tour with Tyler and ended up coming up and meeting this whole Rochester crew.
Yeah. That was actually, that wasn't my first tour, but it was my second tour, but it was the first tour I did with Condition Oakland. I think after we did that one tour, and I kind of like came up to hang out and do. So we were doing the Violent Nuns at this point because we thought it'd be funny to be the Violent Nuns for a little bit, and I was just kind of like, I'm like, it's fun being the Violent Nuns for a little bit, but you know what would be cool, since like you guys aren't really playing with a drummer right now and I'm acoustic, if we all kind of went on a tour, or maybe Tyler said that, one of us said that, and then we both of our eyes lit up. We're like, yo, that'd be a great idea to go on a tour with each other. And so they booked the tour. I booked a couple shows. Obviously, I booked the ones that weren't very good. But, you know, we went up to Rochester, and I was like, so this is what an actual tour feels like. This is great. And so we went on a bunch of other tours together, and that was fun.
Yeah, so, and that's when you and I met, and that's been it's been fun. But one of the things I remember from early on is you bringing your comic books along, and I remember you had the Captain Anarchy comic book.
Yeah, I forget exactly at what point I started doing comics again, but after 2010, I had a real sour taste in my mouth about doing any kind of comics. And in most of 2011, I didn't do them, and then in 2012, I started doing them again after an idea I had with some friends about, because we just saw The Dark Knight Rises, okay?
Mm-hmm.
And I had this old character that I used to draw in high school called Captain Anarchy. And we were joking around like, hey, if he had like a super villain bad guy, it would probably be the hipster, like the Joker.
Yeah.
But he's a hipster. So we kind of started joking around about that, and they're like, oh man, if only we knew like someone who did comics and stuff. And I'm like, I do comics and I could do it, so I wrote the story and I drew it, and it came out great. And it was like my first foray back into doing comics after not doing them for so long. And then eventually I tried doing a sequel to Captain Anarchy. I finished it and I didn't like it, so I never released it.
And did you self-publish that Captain Anarchy
That
comic
was
book?
all self-published.
Cool. And how many copies of that did you put out and sell?
I know compared to most of the comics I do or used to do back in the day, the run was pretty like, I think I got about, it wasn't like a huge run, but it was about like 50, maybe 100, but they all sold. So, that was pretty refreshing. And then I was like, oh, I'm going to do more stuff with comics now because it actually seems like it's going somewhere.
Yeah. And was there something that came in between that and when you started doing those Guts Crew comics?
Well, yeah, we're bringing that up. I actually started doing, after I got sober, I started working on the book Life is Pain.
Mm-hmm.
And that was about, me dealing with, like, my alcoholism and stuff. And I did that, and I planned to release that, and I never got the funding to release it, so I never did. So it kind of just sat on my computer until now when I'm making the film about it, which worked out better. Cool. And then after I did Life is Pain, I did Squid Life Crisis, which was never released either. Which I'm planning on doing the same thing with that I did with Life is Pain. And then with those two, I kind of started, I adapted a style from a book I did in 2010 called Total Crap, where basically it was just me drawing little absurd pictures and writing nonsensical stories with them. Okay. So I used that style in Life is Pain and Squid Life Crisis because it was easier to draw and it was more appealing. It didn't look like what everyone else draws.
Okay. Cool.
And I remember it like it was yesterday. I'm sitting there, and I think I was with Ed from Right Hand Cure and the 40 Odd Steves, and I'm like, kind of like, it'd be funny if I just like started drawing a comic about the local music scene. And I think I had just this like dumb idea. It was the first Guts Crew comic I ever drew, and he was sitting right there with me when I drew it. and I don't even remember what the idea was. I'd have to look it up, but it was something with burned CDs, and it ended up with like Billy with his shirt off and a goat. And I was like, hey, this is pretty good. I'm like, you know what? I'm going to start doing these. I'm going to do them, and this is what always happens. I'm going to do these comics once a week so I do not stress myself out. And the next day, I drew the first comic with Krusty Keenan in it. And that was it. Like, I drew it, and I think I put it on Facebook, and I got like 50 likes, and I was like, you know what? I'm just going to keep going.
Nice. Now, how many of those Guts Crew comics did you do, and with that name? Do you remember?
Actually, I do. I have this all documented and everywhere. Well, my Netflix is still up. What do you know? I have about the first 5 volumes are all Guts Crew. There's about 549 actual Guts Crew comics.
Wow.
And currently, I'm at, let's see here, 1,445 finished comics.
Wow.
And that is not including holiday specials or what I did for the deli. I have about 100-some comics done for the deli.
The deli is that's a Philadelphia-based. Is it a magazine or just a website?
Yes, it's actually a national-based music magazine.
Okay, that's awesome. I didn't know much about it.
Yeah, there's like websites for like each major American city on the internet, but there's only one actual like released publication in New York City.
Okay, and so. You started out doing the Guts Crew ones, which, I mean, those were... They're super fun for me and all the people that, like, we know you. So we all made it, like, people in the scene here in Rochester and people back home, we all kind of made appearances. So obviously that's super fun for us. But then you kind of transitioned to Crustoons, which is also super rad. And how many and you started that as just a comic, and then you developed that into your cartoon.
Yeah, well, the reason why, and everybody always asks me this, the reason why Guts Crew became Crustoons. You see, the fun part about Guts Crew was everyone always asked me, oh, you should draw me like a cartoon.
Yeah.
And that's what Guts Crew was. It was me drawing my friends as cartoons because they always asked me to draw them as cartoons. And then it kind of got to a point where everybody wanted to be in it. Mm-hmm. And it also got to another point where I would draw people like Mars from the right hand here. He has some, anxiety, social issues. Here you go. Please don't put me in one of these again. And it was not like I made like an insult to him or like insulted him or anything. He was just like, no, just don't do it again. Don't put me in it again. And so I'm still doing these, and it's like everybody's like liking them, and then I'm like, I don't really want to draw, as much as I love all my friends, I really don't want to draw my friends forever. And at the same time, this little made-up side character, the little crust punk kid, Krusty Keenan, kept kind of showing up, and every time he was in a comic, everybody loved it. Because he would, like, get the crap beat out of him, or he'd get made fun of. What is that?
I don't know. I'm trying to figure that out myself. Alright, it stopped.
Alright. So he's this little crust punk kid who's always getting beat up and made fun of, and everyone's like always like, shitting on him, and they're like, get the hell out of here, Krusty Keenan, and he's like, I just went chase for 40. And the mythos of Krusty Keenan began to build. That everyone learned that he lived in a dumpster behind the Guts Crew Records building. And then eventually the convenience store guy showed up, and Officer Sturgeon shows up, and then eventually Krusty's friend Hawk, who used to wear a dress shirt with a tie like Avril Lavigne for some reason, he showed up. And all these other little characters, like Punk Rock Friend Number 3 showed up, and who originally was just making fun of punk rock fashion and people who had no idea what they were supporting. And he eventually just became his own character. And of course, Clowny the Juggalo showed up. And then I was at this point where I'm like, I have all these little characters here. I could kind of probably start this focusing on what Krusty's life is like outside of the record label. And it just kind of transitioned to one day Dan Campbell showing up and saying, "You damn crust punk, why don't you just spend your day at the bar?" And he's just like, "I can't go in a bar, I'm only 16. And the next thing you know, Child Services showed up and shipped them back to school. And that was the exact point where I took everybody out of that little world of Guts Crew Records and threw them into Krusty's world to see what he's doing and how his life is." And at first, everyone was like, "I like this better when my friends were in it." And I was kind of like really defending it. I'm like, I really like this. I think it's going to go somewhere. And eventually, when the real life characters started kind of phasing themselves out, and other characters like Hardcore Polar Bear, the Skinheads, of course, Straight Edge Susie, who I'm told, at least by a lot of girls who read the comic, that she's one of their favorite characters because she's not like your regular female character who's like a damsel in distress or anything. No, she doesn't take anyone's crap.
Mm-hmm.
That's what she is. It's like she's her own woman, she's independent, and she does her own thing. And, you know, if Krusty does something stupid, she's like, "I don't think that's such a good idea, Krusty." And, you know, hilarity ensues.
Okay, so we were talking about Crustoons. That's where we were.
Yeah, I forget which aspect, though.
Oh, well, we were talking about how the transition from Guts Crew to Crustoons, and I mean, I love both. I think you kind of opened up the door to have a broader audience once you kind of took your friends out of it, because then you could,
yeah,
you were able to.
I mean, it's weird. Yeah, it's weird. It's like when it was just Guts Crew, like the most of my audience was like all my friends that were in the comic, and then when it turned into Crustoons, that's when all the people I didn't know started reading it and thought it was like the greatest thing ever.
Yeah, and it has a different feel from other comics and cartoons because it's kind of based in the subculture that we come from.
Yeah, I mean, you have your other comics like Say and Life is Posers and Nothing Mattress, and they're good, but I think Crustoons differentiates itself from that by actually showing like the lives of these characters, and like, you know, it's more of like an aspect of it from more of a musician's point of view, because like in a lot of these other comics, it's like, you know, you never see them like talking about going on tour or booking a house show or stuff like that, or, you know, going to a music store and asking the guy why they give guitar picks out in little weed bags, and they say, well, because that's not the only thing we sell.
Now, did you do Wine and Dine as well, which is another, you know, internet cartoon? But did you start that as a comic, you know, after you had already started doing Guts Crew and Crustoons?
Yeah. I originally started doing Wine and Dine because I had a meeting with a magazine. When I was doing Guts Crew, I was kind of getting into this like, one of my biggest dreams. Hold on. One of my biggest dreams always was to have my stuff featured in some sort of a magazine.
Mm-hmm.
So I started putting some stuff together. Like, I took the Guts Crew stuff. I actually got that in a magazine first, and then I was like, I'm gonna try to actually get paid for this. So I went to this other local magazine, and I showed them my stuff, and they're like, "This is good, but we don't want to run this." And I'm like, "Well, if I made you a standalone comic to run in your magazine, would you run that? And they're like, well, yeah, it depends. See what it was. So we had this idea, me and my one friend at work. Well, he kind of like pushed me to it because he was a fan of my comics when he was younger. Because I work at a restaurant full time as like my actual job, and we had this idea. It's like we have a lot of colorful characters here, and one of them, of course, was Michael.
Mm-hmm.
And I pretty much was like, it would be cool if I wrote a pilot for like a cartoon TV show that about a restaurant, you know, that's kind of like run into the ground, and it's just this guy who's completely hates his life and he's trying to get somewhere with this. And I kind of wrote a little pilot for this show, and I never really did anything with it, and I was kind of sitting on it, and then I'm like thinking about this original comic idea, and I'm like, I want something that's going to be contemporary that everybody's going to get, and then I'm like, I could take this idea, and I'll take the chef character, who at the time had no name, and Mikey, and it will just be the exploits of Mikey and this chef character, and the chef pretty much just always yelled at Mikey, which is what happens at my job every day. And I did a couple. I did about the first date, and then I went to the magazine, and I'm like, well, here, what do you think about this? And they're like, I don't know. It's kind of not what we want. Do you think maybe you could, like, draw a comic about, like, the people that work here in this office? And I was just kind of like, I don't work, so I don't know how to write comedy about an office. So then I started writing No Class, that little short-lived comic I had for a little bit. And then, like, after 6 of them, I'm like, this isn't funny. I don't like this. So I just showed it to them, and actually, this is at the point where they stopped returning my calls, because Panorama Magazine does not like paying anybody for original content. They only like running ads.
Okay.
So that left a bad taste in my mouth, and I was just like, all right, well, I'm going to take Wine and Dine, and I'm going to give it to the other magazine that I was doing stuff for, and I gave Crust Tunes to Pennsylvania Musician, so they were both being run in magazines at the same time. And while I was making these comics for Hazleton Life magazine, at the same time I was beginning to draw other little Wine and Dines, like in my spare time. I'm like, hey, we'll just draw this. This is funny. Oh, look, there's a waitress now, and then another wait. Then I got to the point where I had about maybe like 80 or 90 of them, and I'm like, I gotta start doing stuff with these. So I announced I was going to start running Wine and Dine once a week. And then I was just like, I'm just going to run it every day. So that's kind of where that all came from. But I mean, and it's real weird, because now, like, I used to do Ted Simon years ago. And, like, I would do, like, hope, if I was lucky, one every other day. And now I'm doing, like, the first thing I do when I wake up, I wake up, well, this is if I'm not working. I wake up, I take a shower, I go upstairs, and I draw 2 comics in 2 different worlds. That's now I have about 1,000 some of Wine and Dine made up, and like I said, there's about almost 1,500, or what is it? 1500. That's what the number is of Crust Tunes comics.
That's awesome. And Crust Tunes wasn't that or maybe it still is, I don't know, but wasn't that up on Maximum Rock and Roll's website at some point?
Yeah, Maximum Rock and Roll run that for a little bit. I kind of just like sent it out there, and they were like, hey, these are pretty cool, we'll definitely run it. So we ran it for a little bit, and the worst part about Maximum Rock and Roll was I would send them one, and it'd be like a really good comic, like the one where Krusty couldn't get on the show because he didn't sell enough tickets, And Booker's like, you can't play. And Krusty's like, well, what do you need for me to play? He's like, your firstborn. And he's like, come on, Susie, back to the band now, let's go. And they were like, we don't run this, but we'll run the one with Susie in the cop cosplay uniform because, you know, sexism is cool.
Weird.
And I'm just like, it got to a point where I was like, the only time these guys will run something from a cartoonist if there's some sort of like sexist notion in it.
Mm.
And I didn't like that, so I stopped sending stuff to Maximum Rock and Roll.
Gotcha.
And then I started just working on the cartoon itself.
Yeah. Well, that sucks that that's how that worked out, but it must be kind of, you know, cool that a publication, you know, even if it's just a website that has the history that Maximum Rock and Roll does, you know, gave any time to something you've done. That's got to be, you know, pretty rad, right?
I mean, yeah, it's kind of it was cool. It was really like humbling to be in Maximum Rock and Roll. I mean, even though it was the website, but at the same time, it's like you got to stick with like your morals and stuff.
For sure.
And I don't really like, yeah.
Now, you've been doing the cartoons. Both you've done 2 seasons of Crustoons. Is that correct? Are 2 seasons finished?
Yeah, the first 2 seasons are done. Well, they're done, already out there.
Yeah, and there's how many episodes are in each?
20.
Cool. And what about Wine and Dine?
We work on Wine and Dine. I mean, we have all the little shorts done up of them, but when I started working on season 1 of Wine and Dine, I had this grand vision of it. I was like, I'm going to do this just like Crustoons. I'm going to do 20 episodes. It's going to be great. But when I decided to start doing a cartoon about the everyday operations of a restaurant, I didn't realize that inside of a restaurant you have all bits and pieces that you have to throw in and animate. And literally, the difference between Crustoons and Wine and Dine is this. Crustoons takes place in a bunch of different environments.
Mm-hmm.
And Wine and Dine takes place in one area that I had to literally lay out the entire foundation for and make each little scene, like each little room, up on the computer and hand drawn and stuff. So, and I'd have to remember for like continuity where each little room is.
Mm-hmm.
So, and Wine and Dine kind of like, that's when it kind of took a life of its own, where I had to do like the dining room first off in the show. That took me a couple hours to do.
Mm-hmm. Because
you have each little table and chair in there, and then of course you got your background and stuff like that. But yeah, compared to Crustoons, there's a lot more detail.
Okay. Now, what do you think? Which one do you think overall is? Do you get better responses from, you know, on the internet or from just from friends?
Well, this is where it gets. I actually wanted to talk about this.
Good. I'm glad.
I have fans for each of my shows / comics that I do, and it seems like the people that absolutely love Wine and Dine hate Crustoons, and the people that absolutely love Crustoons will not give Wine and Dine the light of day. But then you have these very rare fans that like both things, and they're equally, and they're like, oh, I like them both. And then, like, when a Crustoons character shows up on Wine and Dine, it's like, oh my god, that's so cool! You know? But right now, I think because of the I don't know. See, that's really weird, because I kind of feel like Wine and Dine had a better response, but I think the only reason for that is because it had better production quality than Crustoons. If the production quality for Wine and Dine would have been the same on Crustoons, I think Crustoons would actually be a lot more popular.
Okay.
But unfortunately, there wouldn't have been 20 episodes for each season then, because I would have had to spend about 3 weeks on each episode. The original first 2 seasons, each episode of Crustoons took me about a week to do.
Okay.
Near the end of season 2, when I started changing how I do things and using better programs and stuff, an episode took about 2 to 3 weeks.
Now, did you ever have any sort of training as far as animation and production, or is this all? Have you just kind of figured out how to do all this stuff on your own?
The latter.
Okay.
I remember
That's
like
awesome.
it was yesterday. I went to. I gotta stop saying that. I went to a Thanksgiving dinner with a girlfriend at the time, and they had asked me. They're like, "Oh, so what?" I'll even use one of my voices. Like, "What do you do for a living?" And I'm like, "Well, I work in a restaurant and I do cartoons as well." Like moving picture cartoons? And I'm like, "No, like little comic strips." How droll. So, I'm driving home. Hold on.
Right.
So I'm driving home, and I'm thinking, like, it's like really itching at me. Like, everybody's always said, like, yo, if you did animation, it'd be so funny. And I'm like, I gotta figure this out. So the next morning, I woke up, and I'm like, I'm gonna figure out this animation nonsense. And I go downstairs, and I watched a couple videos on animation just to get a feel of, like, exactly what it is. And then I'm like looking up these programs online, and none of them are working out for me. And I'm like, you know what? We're gonna do this South Park style. We're gonna do like I'm gonna draw everything all separate, cut out animation. I'm just gonna draw them, split them up with a computer, do little movements and stuff. And that's what we're gonna do.
Mm-hmm.
So what I literally did, I did that, and I made everything up, and like I colored it, made it look all nice. And I went into Photoshop, and I manipulated each character for each single individual frame of how they're going to move and how they're going to talk.
Wow.
And then I strung it all together. And the funniest thing about this was I was like, I have no idea how any of these characters are going to sound. So I'm like Chef Cookie, and I'm like, you know what? Since everyone always thinks that Chef Cookie is me, I'll just do my voice for Chef Cookie. And then I had a little impression of Michael I always did, just to, like, bust his balls at work. So I'll use that. And I made the very first animation I ever did, which was the first Wine and Dine short. And I pretty much was like, I just did that, and I was like, showed it to everybody, and they're like, hey, that looks like shit, but it's pretty funny. If it looked good, it'd be even funnier. So I just kept doing like little stupid animation things that I did, and eventually I got good at it.
Well, I love that. I kind of love that the DIY ethic even crosses over into the making of the cartoon. Like, you just kind of wanted to do it, and you figured out how to do it on your own.
Yeah, and each episode of the cartoon, well, Crustoons and Wine and Dine, it's written, animated, drawn, most of the music in voice acting. I guess I don't know if I said that twice. That's all done by me.
Mm-hmm.
Unless, of course, if it's otherwise noted, which I think the episodes where I have multiple voice actors on are a lot better than the ones where it's just me. A lot of season 2 of Crustoon, since it seemed very rushed, a lot of the characters were me.
Okay.
But then near the second part of season 2, Keith kind of, the business fairy, he kind of got really into wanting to do more voice acting. He never did it until I asked him to. And I thought it'd be funny if he was a shady promoter, because I know he's dealt with people like that. And then eventually he was like, yo, give me more voices to do. So, I let him be Robert Barron's sidekick in season 1, I think. I don't know. I think it was season 1. And then, he did voices in other episodes, and then he was in Wine and Dine as the health inspector. And now he's in Life is Pain as one of the main characters.
Okay. So it seems like now you've kind of got I've seen most of your cartoons, and there's kind of a lot of the same names are showing up as voice actors. So it seems like you've kind of built a team, like a good team of voice actors.
Yeah, well, when we started like doing the voice acting thing, it literally was just me like asking friends. Like I think the first person I asked to be on something was Caitlin, and the reason was because we used to hang out years ago, and she knew like I wanted to do stuff with film and stuff, and I'm like, if I ever become like a director or something, you're definitely gonna be one of my movies, and haha. And then when I started doing animation, I'm like, crap, I'm gonna need girls to do some voices that aren't my girlfriend at the time, because the girlfriend I had at the time, she didn't really have like a prolific voice and couldn't really do other voices.
Okay.
So I was just kind of like, I just called Caitlin. I'm like, yo, you want to be something on a cartoon? And she's like, sure. Because she does like theater and stuff like that. So she started doing the voice of Flo, which was perfect. She is Flo. And then when we started doing Crustoons, I'm like, I think you're going to be Sheila the Desolate One. Just let your mall girl out and let it go. So she's Sheila, and she's also What's Her Name, which kind of is the same voice as Flo, but we're going to ignore that. And in Wine and Dine, of course, like I said, she's Flo, and she does Brittany too. And I think her acting as Brittany is probably the best work she's done with any cartoon I've done. And she's in Life is Pain as well. She plays one of the characters. And she also does some voice acting stuff with me on Space Heater.
Cool.
And then, there's other voice actors, like there's Zach Hauser. He was like the second person I asked. I'm like, Zach, I said, Zach, do you want to do a voice? He's like, oh my god, yeah, I'll do a voice. He was so excited. But like, the original voice of Air the Anarchist was going to be Alec Gallagher, but he is so not dedicated to anything that he just would never show up. So I'm just like, Zach, you're Air now, so just use your voice. And I eventually let him start doing other voices too. So now Zach is like one of our main voice actors.
Cool.
And Keith, Dylan Anderko from Space Heater. He has his own cartoon. He does some voices too. After we found out about each other, we kind of like traded off on doing voice acting with each other.
Cool.
And then you have your cool little guest spots like Eric Fun. He's on a bunch of episodes. Chris Decker. He plays Hawk's dad, and Mitch Chaplin, and some other characters and things I do. And Bob Ellis from Heroes and Hooligans, and Chelsea Smar, of course. She does a lot of voice stuff. It's real fun, Like when you imagine to do these things, you think like, oh well, if I have money, I'm going to get so and so, the famous actor, to be the voice of this person. But then when you actually do it and you have your friends do it, it's like so much more worth it. Like when we did the Christmas episode and Tyler and Lightsville were on it, that was the funnest episode because they literally just acted as themselves.
That's awesome. So you mentioned Life is Pain a while ago, and I know from our personal conversation that's like the next big thing you're doing. Is that correct?
Yeah. Well, I always I said when I was doing season 1 of Crustoons, someone had asked me, they're like, do you ever think you're going to do like an animated movie or something like that? And I kind of had this idea, like, I really want to do like a Crustoons movie at some point, and the idea would be like they're all on tour, and the tour just does not go good. And I had that written, but the way I wrote it, there was just so much going on, I was like, I would never be able to do this by myself. And, like, at the same time, I'm looking at Life is Pain, and I'm like, wow, I should really release this. And it just sat there, and sat there, and sat there, and I'm reading it over and over again, and I'm like, you know what? I'm like, I think this would really make a good film if I did it. Because when I would do a graphic film, I'd always, like, design it, like, to be, like, if it was a movie, how would it work? And that's how I would design it. And that's how I had designed Life is Pain and Squid Life Crisis, and finally I was like, I want to try to do this as a film. And then I think halfway through Wine and Dine, like at the beginning of Wine and Dine, I was like, I can't do a film. I gotta hold off on that and not do it. And then halfway through Wine and Dine, I'm like, the next thing I'm gonna do, I want to do a film because I feel like that's where I need to go. and I think it was literally like the week after I did Wine and Dine. This is what I always do to myself. I'm like, I'm going to take a month off, relax, not stress myself out, refresh my brain, and then go right into Life is Pain.
Mm.
I sat down the day after I finished Wine and Dine. I started messing around with like some snow effects on my computer, and the next thing you knew, the first scene of Life is Pain was done. And I was like, well, there's no turning back now. I guess I'm doing Life is Pain.
Very cool.
And then I just pretty much reached out to everyone I've been involved with before who's voice acted for me and was like, if you want to be in the film, there's a part for you. And we got Chris, Keith, Caitlin. Unfortunately, Zach was not able to lead the voice for this one. We had planned to, but he had just been too busy. And of course, we had some newer voice actors too. Like, since we were talking about Rochester, Corey Kesserling does a voice.
Very cool.
And John Kiss, of course, he has one of the best parts in the whole movie. He plays a drunk guy who keeps asking for change for 40s. And originally in the book, this character was just like a little side character. But when I asked John to do it, he says static. And then John was like, hey, could I do some ad-lib? And I was like, okay, sure. So he did a little bit of ad-lib on there, and it just came out so great. Like, his character is just... I think his character is my favorite character in the whole movie, and when I do another movie, because I do plan on doing more films in the future, he's definitely going to be in them, as well as episodes of Crust Tunes.
Cool. When's the expected release for Life is Pain?
Well, hopefully it's going to be finished next week. The plan is next week. It's probably going to be the week after. And then I plan on doing an aggressive little promotion campaign for it. I'm going to be making a Facebook event page. I'm going to be actually taking out some ad space, hopefully, to promote the release of the film.
Cool.
And the projected release date, I want to say, is going to be the end of June. Because I want to have it out before Yard Stock.
Oh, awesome.
And another idea I have is I want to take it around to venues across the Northeast and actually premiere it before it's released, so people will see it and get a buzz going.
Yeah, and this is, and you know, it's not a full length, you know, feature length movie. Like it's a short film, correct?
Yeah, it's probably only. It's looking right now like it's going to be about 10 minutes.
Yeah.
Which is the longest thing I've ever done.
Okay.
Might be shorter. I'd like if it was longer, but you can only stretch something out for so long before it seems watered down.
Mm-hmm.
But like I said, it's going to be 10 minutes. The story, like I was saying earlier about the film, it's about. I wouldn't want to say it's mostly about alcoholism, because as I'm working on it, it seems more or less it's about. What was the tagline I came up with? Life is what you make of it, not what it turns you into.
Okay.
It's about getting out there and fixing things for yourself and not relying on other people to do that for you.
Very cool. Well, I'm super excited to see it, and what's...
Oh, yeah.
Oh, go ahead.
It's definitely going to be, like, the most visually appealing thing I've ever done. Originally, I planned on using bits of classical music as the score, but halfway through working through the first part of it, I'm like, this piece I'm using is not going to be long enough. And I feel like if I keep it with that, I'm going to be hurting the story. So I ended up where I started to write a main theme for it, and now, almost done with the film, it has its entire film score for it. So that's a whole thing too.
Yeah, that's another thing we haven't even touched on, is like you're not only animating and voicing a lot of, you know, some of these characters, you're also, you know, scoring a lot of these, you know, the cartoons and obviously the Life is Pain short film and you know, and also using using Friends music. So I love that, you know, you're including your friends and doing so much work on your own as well.
Yeah, one of my favorite parts of Crust Tubes, and I'm really looking forward to season 3 with this aspect, is adding music from my friends' bands, or bands in general, because it's like every episode has a theme, and I always tend to pick the one song that fits that theme perfectly. Like, we do the Christmas episode, and we used Merry Christmas by the D-Grade Monsters. And, of course, they were all over the Halloween episode. And then, we'll do, I'm trying to think of another good episode. We'll use the ticketing, and we use these streets from Endangered Youth.
Yeah.
Which is a whole other thing.
That's an old school track too, man. That's super old.
And that episode was really hard to pick a song for, because I'm like, I don't have any friends that have any songs about parking tickets or anything. So I'm just like, all right, I'm just going to use these streets from Endangered Youth because they're driving on the street.
Well, that's not what the song's about at all, but that's amazing.
Yeah, it's not what it's about, but I mean, I made it work somehow. And then, the episode with the Lucha Rats, who basically are a parody of the Aquabats. We used one of Keith's songs to start a ska band. And then, I forgot what I used at the end of Down with the Car Sickness. And I think it was, a good example is the meme episode, where the whole running joke is internet trends, and at the end, Hawk is like, yeah, this shows you not to give in to internet trends. Come on, let's take a selfie to celebrate. And then the music at the end was Should I Take a Selfie by Billy Mack. Which was that was my favorite ending of any episode.
Yeah. Now will Crust Tunes Season 3 be the next project you are focused on after you're done with Life is Pain?
Yes. When I finish Life is Pain, my plan really this time is to take 2 weeks off and not do anything involved with cartoons or, music. I have to do stuff because I'm in, 2 bands.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm planning, the first episode we plan on producing is going to be, it's actually called Death Rosenstock. And it's about Death coming for Krusty, since he faked death in the Crust Tunes episode, Punk is Dead. But they find out at the same time that Death actually has his own solo project. And they make a deal with him and say, well, if we get you shows, will you let us live? And it kind of works. And it's going to be real funny, because that whole concept literally just came from me doing a wordplay on Jeff Rosenstock's name. I'm like, Death Rosenstock, and then it just clicked in my head.
Yeah, that's awesome.
And we're really, on this season, we're really going to be focusing more. I know season 2 kind of got out of control with, the super villains. Michael Bay shows up and plans to blow up Gutsville, and it's like, oh, well, I'm sure this has something to do with punk rock somewhere. But in season 2 or season 3, I'm really planning on having more episodes about Keenan and the Krusties going on tour to out of state, dealing with house shows, dealing with musicians trying to glob onto your show. I have an idea. I want to add the feminist. Well, I don't know if this actually showed up in the comic yet. I don't think it did. It might have. But there's a new group of female characters called the Gutsville Feminist Front, and I want to involve them more in it. Because there's a lot of female characters from the comic that showed up since season 2 that haven't showed up in the cartoon yet, and I really want to use them.
Cool.
the twins, the green-haired girl from the Punk House, Sam the Scene Girl, of course, Gina Strzelecki, the poet. It's so much material that I could just put into this now, and it's beautiful. But yeah, we're going to be doing that. There's plans. We're adding a new nemesis to Krusty this season. Lou, the mechanic, he's kind of taking a back seat. He's planning his evil schemes at this time. And in season 3, we're introducing a new band called the Black Void. They are a screamo-core power violence band. And they are fronted by Krusty's evil twin cousin, Montgomery Von Montgomery, who is an overprivileged rich kid, who wears, fingerless gloves and a denim black vest, and he's just like, he's literally Krusty's arch nemesis. And it does a little joke with most cartoons, like, where you watch, like, season 1 of like, Ninja Turtles, and, like, you see everything, and he's, like, fighting the Shredder. And then in season 2, like, some character shows up you've never heard of before, but they're like, oh, we know who this guy is. He's our arch enemy. Or, like, in Invader Zim, where in, like, season 1, you see Gur and Zim the entire time, and in season 2, Minnie Moose shows up, and they're like, who the hell is this? Like, oh, it's Minnie Moose. He's been here the whole time. Yep. But pretty much, when they first come in contact with Montgomery Von Montgomery, Krusty's like, so we meet again. And everyone's like, who? You've never met this guy. And he's like, no, we've met tons of times.
Are you planning on doing another season of Wine and Dine in the future, or is that just kind of in the back seat for now?
Yes, actually, I'm glad you brought this up, because a lot of people have been asking about things. After season 3 of Crustoons, now this season 3 is probably not going to be as long as season 2 or 1 was, because I feel like in those ones I did more quantity, not quality.
Okay.
And I'm kind of aiming for quality, not quantity for this season. I want to do a lot of episodes that are music themed, since I'm doing other cartoons now.
Mm-hmm.
But there's probably going to be about 10, 15 episodes of the next season of Crustoons. They're going to be good episodes.
Cool.
After that, I'm planning with Chris Decker right now to produce a Simon and Rusty full-length cartoon. And that's going to be done in the same vein as the first season of Wine and Dine. Like, we're only going to do 5 episodes to just get a feel and see how people like it. After that, we're going to be working on season 2 of Wine and Dine. And my plan with that is to actually do more than 5 episodes and kind of get more into, like, Cookie's life and all the characters' lives. And, I have a couple, like, episode ideas right now. Like, Guy Fieri shows up without being asked to, and breaks into the restaurant and just, like, ruins their day by walking around with a cameraman and asking people questions. Another episode, or other ideas, like, Tater Tot is having problems with bullying at school, but while this is going on, Brittany gets a crush. And this is straight out of Always Sunny. I probably subliminally thought of this, but Brittany has a crush on a 18-year-old. And it gets real creepy, and Chris Hansen shows up. And of course, we have other episode ideas, like, I was talking about an episode idea called Rock Out With Your Crock Out, where the steam table breaks and they have to put everything in crock pots, and there's just a million crock pots everywhere. Yeah, and, like, there's just, like, so much that we want to do with it.
Dude, you do a lot of stuff, and that, like, just... You'll be busy for a long, long time doing all this stuff.
Oh, yeah. Like, the fact that I don't have any sort of personal life whatsoever just doesn't even matter anymore. That's out the window. I just have so much creative stuff that I have to work on. I mean, I have this. I have another film I'm going to be working on in the very near future. Me and the business fairy Keith were talking about putting together a pilot for maybe, like, Adult Swim or IFC or something.
That would be awesome. Now that
that's just the idea. We don't know if we're actually going to do it. But.
Yeah. Now, is there... Because I don't really know anything about the world of cartoons and anything like that, other than just, like, watching them, when they, end up on TV or Netflix or whatever. But... is there a whole, like, underground, like, world of, like, tons of people making these cartoons? Because it seems...
If there is, I haven't found it yet.
Okay.
The only other people I know that make cartoons I've already mentioned, and that's Dylan Anderko with Space Heater. And that show is just... if you like what I do, watch what he does, and
Okay.
your eyes will be like, wow, this is completely different from what Ted does, but this is insane.
Yeah. So
Because he's more or less on a lot of like the crudeness of Space Heater just gives it its own style.
okay. Yeah, because
Yeah.
I mean, I know how it is in music, and everyone's got a band or some sort of project these days, and it's so like everything's always so oversaturated as far as like so many bands, but not as many people are willing to, or at least not people I know are willing to put the amount of time and energy into the animation and doing all the stuff that you do as far as that goes.
Yeah, a lot of people they like to say that I don't really have a life, but what I choose to do with it, I like.
Yeah, and I mean,
Like literally, this is how with Breastings it used to go. I'd come home on a Sunday, I would voice act the episode. I'd start animating it Sunday night. I'd work on it Monday when I had free time. I'd work on it Tuesday when I had free time. I'd work on it Wednesday when I had free time. If it was a longer episode, I'd work on it Thursday, but normally by the end of the week, it'd be done and I would post it. And then I would be free on the weekends to do shows. You're talking about oversaturation. I stopped being a graphic designer recently because of oversaturation. Everybody who has a computer has a pirated copy of Photoshop and is a graphic designer
Mhm.
now. It's killing the graphic design business. People have gone to school for this for 4 years, and now they can't find work because everybody makes flyers on their own computer.
yeah.
So that kind of put things in perspective for me, to stop trying to be something that I'm not and try to make money off of it,
Mhm.
and to just focus on working on my cartoons and my comics because nobody else does that. I don't know anybody besides Kat Burbage. I probably pronounced her name wrong, and maybe a few of my friends from Virginia that focus on doing cartoons and comics and stuff like that. So I was just kind of like, I'm just going to focus on doing this and focus on doing film because I don't know anybody who really does this. So if somebody needs something like that, they could ask me. And it's not like, oh, hey, well, I need a flyer for a show. I can do it. And then they go behind your back and they get someone else to do it with, Microsoft Paint.
Yeah.
It's like really sad. I mean, I'm all for like DIY stuff, but it's just sad like with people who actually have talent try to do these things, that you just kind of throw it in their face.
Mhm.
And I'll quote something from somebody where pretty much it was said like, I'll do a design for your band for a little compensation. They're like, you want me to pay you for a drawing? That's stupid. That's what society's come to these days.
Yeah. Well, it's like if you want something, just if you don't want to pay for something, then then do it yourself. I guess don't expect somebody else to do something.
That's like doing your own electrical work at home. Good luck with it,
Yeah. All right, man. Well, let's wrap things up. Where can people find your stuff on the internet? And there's gonna be all these links in the show notes, like there always are. But where can people find your stuff?
We'll have a website, www.tedhazardstudios.com. Of course, I'm on YouTube. If you look up Crust Tunes or Wine and Dine or Ted Hazard, it'll come up right away. If you Google Crust Tunes, there's so many different links that go to my websites. Same thing with Wine and Dine. You might have to dig a little more for Wine and Dine because I'm sure there's like some sort of like food websites called Wine and Dine.
Yeah, well, it's spelled wine like WHINE. So
Yeah,
so that'll help.
yeah.
Okay, awesome. And as far as musically, I know you've recently put out a new Ted Hazard album, and you're playing with Condition Oakland. Do you want to plug what you're doing musically and anything you've got coming up in the near future?
Well, I'm on Yardstock. I have a bunch of local shows coming up. There's talks of maybe doing a tour in maybe the fall. But I know I tried doing that last year and it just didn't work. I do in the next year at least starting to work on an album again, another full band album.
Cool.
And I'm also trying to put a volume 2 of Sociopathic Media out, where I'm picking new songs, not new songs, but different songs I haven't performed full band yet, and putting them out, because when Sociopathic Media came out, that was mostly an experiment to see if I could do full band stuff, and it worked. And then I did Self-Reconstruction, which came out great.
It did.
Now I'm going to be doing another Sociopathic Media, and I'm going to be doing songs like Rickety Steps, Fuck You, It's Christmas, maybe Broken Memories, just, stuff I didn't do on the other albums.
Okay. Very cool. All right, man. Well, thank you so much for, spending a couple hours on a Sunday afternoon to talk, and hopefully some new people are going to find out about what you're doing and really dig it.